Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Normandy, watching as her tactical display updated with incoming reports from across the galaxy. Each blinking light represented a successful strike against Council infrastructure, and there were hundreds of them. "Status report," she commanded, her fingers drumming against the command chair's armrest. Commander Park looked up from his station, barely containing his excitement. "Operation Broken Chain is proceeding ahead of schedule, Admiral. We've successfully disrupted hyperspace communications in 17 sectors. The Council fleets are operating blind." Elena nodded grimly. The strategy was working, but she knew they were walking a razor's edge. Humanity had exactly one advantage in this conflict: the element of surprise and their willingness to do what civilized species wouldn't consider. What about the manufacturing worlds? Captain Morrison's strike force hit the hegemony shipyards at Kethmore 6 hours ago. Complete success. They won't be building new vessels for months. The crystalline weapons facilities at Vorthak went dark 3 hours after that. Elena allowed herself a small smile. While the Galactic Council had been debating humanity's fate in their Crystal Palace, human special forces had been systematically dismantling their military infrastructure. It was a strategy that no Council species would have conceived of. Striking first, without declaration, without warning, without the elaborate posturing that galactic politics demanded. But humans had learned warfare in a different school. The bridge communication array crackled to life, and Ambassador Chen's voice filled the space. "Admiral, the Council is demanding an immediate explanation. They're calling it an act of terrorism." "Terrorism?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They threaten to exterminate our entire species, and they call our response terrorism." "Patch me through to the Council chamber." The main screen flickered, showing the chaos that had erupted in the Galactic Council. Representatives were shouting in dozens of languages, their translation fields creating a cacophony of overlapping demands and accusations. At the center of it all, Sarah Chen stood calmly at the human delegation's podium. "This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force," Elena announced, her voice cutting through the noise. The chamber fell silent as her image appeared on their displays. "I understand you have concerns about recent military actions." Zethkar's forearms gestured wildly as he responded. "You have violated every principle of civilized warfare. Attacks without declaration, strikes against civilian infrastructure. This is barbarism." Elena's expression remained neutral. "Civilian infrastructure?" The shipyards were military assets. The weapons facilities were military assets. The communication relays were military assets. We've been very careful to avoid actual civilian casualties, which is more consideration than you plan to show Earth. You cannot possibly believe you can win this conflict. Council Prime Vathan's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. "The full might of the Council's forces will crush your pathetic fleet." "What fleet would that be?" Elena asked mildly. She gestured to her tactical officer, who updated the chamber's display with current military positions. "The Third Hegemony Fleet is stranded at Nexus Station without hyperspace capability. The Crystalline Defense Force is scattered across 12 systems trying to protect manufacturing centers that no longer exist. The Aquatic Confederation's mobile headquarters hasn't been able to establish communication with its subordinate units for 6 hours. The display showed the devastating scope of humanity's opening move. Critical infrastructure across the galaxy was either destroyed or compromised. Command and control systems were in chaos. The Council's vast military machine was effectively paralyzed. How? Theiss of the Aquatic Confederation demanded, his tentacles coiling with stress. "How did you coordinate attacks across such distances? Our intelligence services detected no military buildup, no fleet movements, no preparations for war." Elena's smile was cold. "Because you weren't looking for the right things. You expected us to behave like you, to build massive fleets, to engage in the elaborate dance of galactic politics, to fight according to your rules. You never considered that we might not play your game at all." She activated another display, this one showing shipping manifests and cargo records spanning the past 2 years. "Did you know that Earth exports approximately 2 million tons of agricultural products per month to Council worlds? Did you realize that those cargo ships also carry mining equipment, construction materials, and scientific instruments?" The implications hit several Council members simultaneously. Their environmental sectors began frantically accessing shipping databases. "You've been positioning assets throughout our territory for years," Zethkar accused. This is espionage on an unprecedented scale. No, Elena corrected. This is thinking ahead. Every cargo container that left Earth carried legitimate goods to legitimate buyers. But buried in those shipments were components that could be assembled into weapons, communication jammers, and stealth technology. We've been building our military infrastructure using your own trade networks. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Council. They had not only failed to detect humanity's preparations, they had actively facilitated them. Years of routine trade had masked the largest military deployment in galactic history. Commander Park approached Elena with an urgent message. She read it quickly, then looked back at the Council display with satisfaction. "I have an update for you," she announced. "Operation Kingbreak has just commenced. Your central command facility on Galactic Prime is now under our control." The chamber erupted in panic. Galactic Prime was the most heavily defended world in Council space. Home to the Central Military Command and the quantum communication network that linked every Council world. "Impossible," Bothan declared. "Galactic Prime has orbital defense platforms, 3 fleet squadrons, and shields that could withstand a supernova. All of which are impressive against traditional warfare," Elena agreed. "But we didn't attack from outside. We attacked from inside. Those orbital platforms, they've been running on replacement components manufactured on Earth for the past 8 months. Those fleet squadrons, their computer cores were upgraded last year using our latest quantum processors. And those shields, the maintenance crew that services them includes 57 humans who have been working there for 3 years. The scope of humanity's infiltration was staggering. While the Council had been dismissing them as primitive newcomers, humans had been systematically embedding themselves in every critical system across galactic civilization. "You're insane," This whispered. "Do you realize what you've done? You've destabilized the entire galactic order. Trillions of beings depend on Council infrastructure for their survival." Elena's expression softened slightly, "Which is why we're not destroying it. We're taking control of it. The infrastructure will continue to function, trade will resume, and life will go on. But it will go on under new management." "You mean human management?" Zethkar spat. "No," Elena replied. "I mean competent management. The Galactic Council has grown fat and lazy during your centuries of peace. You've forgotten that civilization is not a given. It's something that must be constantly defended, constantly earned. You thought your technology and your age made you untouchable. You forgot the most important lesson in the universe, which is," Elena's eyes hardened, "that there's always someone hungrier, someone more desperate, someone more willing to do what needs to be done. Today, that someone is humanity, and we're just getting started." The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystalline floor, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into artificial clouds that sparkled with bioluminescent organisms from a dozen different worlds. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sectors, each area carefully climate-controlled to accommodate their biological needs. The air shimmered with translation fields, converting thousands of different languages into coherent meaning. Ambassador Zethkar of the hegemony rose from his gravitational suspension pod, his forearms gesturing in the traditional opening of a formal declaration. The chamber fell silent as his metallic voice echoed through the vast space. "Honored representatives, we gather today to address the continued defiance of the species known as humans, inhabitants of the 3rd planet in the Sol system." His mandibles clicked with satisfaction. "For too long we have tolerated their refusal to acknowledge our authority. Today we vote on the final ultimatum." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The final ultimatum was rarely invoked. It meant complete subjugation or annihilation. In the 12,000 years since the Galactic Council's formation, only 3 species had ever received it. None had survived to tell their story. The human delegation sat in their modest section, a small group of 5 individuals in simple blue uniforms. They looked painfully ordinary compared to the exotic aliens surrounding them. No natural armor, no enhanced sensory organs, no obvious signs of genetic modification, just soft, pale creatures with their strange forward-facing eyes and their peculiar habit of showing emotion through facial expressions. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood slowly, her movement drawing attention, despite her unremarkable appearance. She had served as Earth's primary representative for 3 years, ever since first contact had been established. The council members had grown accustomed to her quiet dignity, but today something was different. There was steel in her posture that hadn't been there before. "Honorable Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation field. "Earth has received your ultimatum. We have 7 standard days to either submit to complete political integration under Council authority, or face the consequences." "Is this correct?" Zethkar's upper arm spread in what his species considered a magnanimous gesture. "The terms are generous, human. Your species will be preserved, your culture documented before integration. Many civilizations would consider this an honor." Sarah nodded slowly. "And if we refuse, then the Sol system will be sterilized," announced Council Prime Vothan, the ancient crystalline being whose consciousness had guided the Council for millennia. His words resonated like struck glass. "This is not a negotiation, human. This is an inevitability. Your species has demonstrated remarkable technological advancement in a remarkably short time. But you lack the wisdom of age. You will learn to accept guidance or you will cease to be a concern." The chamber waited for the expected pleading, the desperate bargaining that always came when a species faced extinction. Instead, Sarah Chen smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Thank you for clarifying the situation," she said. "Earth's response will be delivered tomorrow at the same time." The simplicity of her response sent confused murmurs through the assembly. Ambassador Thus of the Aquatic Confederation's tentacles writhed nervously. "Do you not understand the gravity of your situation, human? This is no mere territorial dispute. This is the full might of 47 civilizations, some of which have existed since before your star began to shine." Sarah's smile didn't waver. "Oh, we understand perfectly. Better than you might think." She gestured to her aide, a young man named Marcus who had been quietly recording the proceedings. He stood and activated a small device that projected a holographic display above the human delegation section. The display showed a star map of local space with trade routes and military positions marked in detail. "You see," Sarah continued, "humanity has been preparing for this conversation for quite some time. We've studied your history, your military tactics, your political structures. We've analyzed every public record, every trade agreement, every territorial dispute from the past 1,000 years." Zethkar's mandibles clicked dismissively. "Intelligence gathering is expected from primitive species attempting to find their place in civilized space." "It changes nothing, doesn't it?" Sarah's voice remained calm, but her eyes had grown cold. "Tell me, Ambassador Zethkar, how many of your worlds are currently experiencing food shortages because of the shipping delays in the Outer Rim?" A ripple of unease passed through the hegemony delegation. Food distribution was a classified internal matter. Sarah continued without waiting for an answer. "And Prime Vothan, how is the investigation proceeding into the missing antimatter shipments from the crystalline manufacturing worlds?" "Still blaming pirates, are we?" The ancient being's crystal structure flickered with what might have been surprise or anger. Around the chamber, representatives began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "You see, honored council," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "While you were dismissing us as primitive upstarts, we were learning. We've been watching, listening, and most importantly, thinking. Humanity has one advantage that none of your ancient civilizations possess anymore. And what would that be?" Vothan's voice carried dangerous harmonics. Sarah's smile became predatory. "We remember how to fight." The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Several species began rapid consultations with their advisors. The concept of warfare had been largely theoretical for most council species for centuries. The Pax Galactica had ensured peace through overwhelming technological superiority and economic interdependence. "Your threats are meaningless," Zethkar declared, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "No single world could stand against the combined fleets of the Council." "You're absolutely right," Sarah agreed. "No single world could, but you're making the same mistake that every galactic empire in history has made. You're thinking like an empire." She touched her communicator and suddenly the chamber's main display activated without authorization from the Council systems. The display showed real-time footage from dozens of different worlds. Council worlds. Massive human ships emerging from hyperspace. Installations going dark. Communication arrays being systematically destroyed. "We're not fighting like a world," Sarah said quietly. "We're fighting like humans. And humans don't just defend. We hunt." The chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications became clear. While the Council had been preparing to issue ultimatums, humanity had already begun their response. The war hadn't started with Earth's reply. It had started the moment the ultimatum was delivered. The emergency session of the Hegemony Parliament was unlike anything in their recorded history. Ambassador Krelthak stood at the center of the crystalline amphitheater, his forearms trembling with rage as he addressed the gathered representatives of his species. "The humans have released classified council archives across the galaxy," he announced, his voice carrying the metallic edge that indicated extreme emotional distress. "The data contains evidence of systematic extermination campaigns spanning 8 millennia." A wave of shocked chittering swept through the assembly. The hegemony prided itself on its ethical standards and its role as a founding member of the Galactic Council. The idea that they had been complicit in genocide was almost incomprehensible. "Surely this is human propaganda," suggested Elder Vex Moore from the Senior Council platform, a desperate attempt to justify their terrorist actions against civilized space. Krelthax activated the central display, showing authenticated council records that had been independently verified by Hegemony intelligence services. "The data has been confirmed as genuine. Our own cryptographic analysis proves these archives are authentic council records, sealed with quantum encryption that cannot be forged." The silence that followed was deafening. Species after species, world after world, civilization after civilization, all erased by council directive for the crime of independence. The Hegemony's own military forces had participated in 17 of these extinctions, believing they were suppressing dangerous threats to galactic stability. "The Altarians," whispered Elder Kethvar, his mandibles clicking with distress. "I commanded the fleet that secured their system after the stellar collapse. We found no evidence of natural disaster, but we were told the investigation was classified." Similar revelations were occurring simultaneously across the galaxy. On the ocean world of Aquatica Prime, the Confederation's military council was reviewing records of their involvement in the systematic destruction of 7 different species. The crystalline collective's harmony nodes were experiencing cascade failures, as their shared consciousness struggled to process the magnitude of their government's crimes. But perhaps nowhere was the shock greater than on Earth itself, where President Catherine Walsh stood before the United Nations Emergency Assembly, addressing not just humanity but the entire galaxy through hijacked council communication networks. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, her voice carried across thousands of worlds by human-controlled transmission arrays. "6 days ago, your leaders issued an ultimatum to Earth. Submit to absolute authority or face complete annihilation. Today we learned that this same ultimatum has been delivered 47 times before. And 47 times when brave species chose freedom over submission, they were murdered." The transmission showed documentation of each extinction event, cross-referenced with official council records that claimed natural disasters or internal conflicts. The pattern was undeniable. Any species that developed sufficient technology and independence to threaten council dominance was systematically eliminated. "The Galactic Council is not a peacekeeping organization," President Walsh continued. "It is not a force for stability or protection. It is a criminal conspiracy that has committed genocide on an industrial scale for thousands of years, and it must end." On crystalline worlds across the collective, individual consciousness nodes began disconnecting from the central harmony network in protest. The shared mind that had governed their species for millennia began fragmenting as members refused to remain connected to a government that had participated in such atrocities. Prime Node Veltar, the central consciousness that had guided crystalline civilization for 3,000 years, made an unprecedented individual appearance before the collective assembly. "I have reviewed the archived data," the ancient being announced, its crystalline form pulsing with emotional distress. "The crimes detailed in these records are accurate. I personally authorized the extinction of the Viridian Republic, believing they posed a threat to galactic stability. I was wrong. We were all wrong." The admission sent shockwaves through crystalline space. Prime Node Veltar had been considered infallible, its decisions guided by the combined wisdom of billions of connected minds. The revelation that this perfect system had been corrupted by deliberate deception shattered the fundamental assumptions of crystalline society. Meanwhile, on dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy, human diplomatic teams were working frantically to prevent the collapse of interstellar civilization. The revelation of council crimes had triggered widespread civil unrest, government resignations, and the breakdown of trade relationships that had existed for centuries. Ambassador Chen, now operating from the captured Council headquarters on Galactic Prime, coordinated the largest diplomatic effort in human history. "We need to stabilize 17 systems simultaneously," she reported to President Walsh. "The hegemony government is facing a revolution. The crystalline collective is fragmenting, and the Aquatic Confederation is considering complete withdrawal from interstellar affairs." "What about the smaller species?" President Walsh asked. "That's actually where we're seeing the most positive response," Chen replied. "The minor council members have always been marginalized by the major powers. Many of them are expressing gratitude for the liberation. The nimble folk have already formally requested to establish relations with Earth directly, rather than through council mediation." The political transformation was unprecedented in galactic history. Thousands of years of established order were crumbling. As species after species learned the true nature of the organization that had claimed to represent their interests, but humanity was discovering that toppling a tyrannical government was easier than replacing it with something better. The logistics of maintaining interstellar trade, communication, and conflict resolution across 47 different species were staggering. "Ma'am," Chen's aide interrupted, "we're receiving emergency communications from the Outer Rim territories. Without council authority backing trade agreements, several border conflicts are escalating to military action." President Walsh rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of galactic civilization settling on her shoulders. "Contact Admiral Vasquez. We need human peacekeeping forces in those systems immediately. And draft a proposal for an emergency interstellar conference. Every species, every government, every faction that wants a voice in what comes next." "What authority do we have to call such a conference?" President Walsh smiled grimly. "The authority of being the only ones willing to take responsibility for cleaning up this mess. The Council built their empire on lies and murder. We're going to build something new on truth and cooperation, even if we have to force people to cooperate long enough to see the benefits." Across the galaxy, human ships moved to flashpoint systems not as conquerors but as peacekeepers. Human diplomats mediated between species that had relied on Council authority for conflict resolution. Human administrators worked to maintain the trade networks and communication systems that billions of beings depended on for survival. It was exhausting, dangerous work that required humans to master political and cultural nuances they had barely begun to understand. But for the first time in galactic history, the mediators were not pursuing their own agenda. Humanity had nothing to gain from interstellar conflicts and everything to lose from the collapse of galactic civilization. The revolution had succeeded beyond humanity's wildest imagination. The Galactic Council was finished, its authority shattered and its leadership discredited. But revolutions were the easy part. Building something better, her from the wreckage would test whether humanity truly deserved the trust they were asking the galaxy to place in the A. Captain Maria Santos crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a crystalline command console, her pulse rifle ready as she monitored the corridor ahead. The Galactic Prime Command Center was a maze of crystalline architecture and quantum processing nodes, each one humming with the computational power needed to coordinate an empire spanning half the galaxy. "Echo Team, report," she whispered into her comm unit. "Third level secured," came the reply from Sergeant Kim. "No casualties. The crystalline guards surrendered when they realized we'd already disabled their weapon systems." Maria shook her head in amazement. In 3 hours of combat, her team had encountered minimal resistance. The Council's military forces, for all their advanced technology and centuries of experience, had proven remarkably unprepared for actual warfare. They had forgotten the difference between policing a peaceful empire and fighting a determined enemy. "Delta Team status? Quantum communication array is under our control," reported Lieutenant Torres. "We're monitoring all Council military communications across 17 sectors. They're in complete chaos, Captain. Half their commanders don't even know they're under attack yet." That was the beauty of humanity's strategy. While the Council operated on protocols designed for managing a peaceful civilization, humans had planned for war. Every contingency, every possible response, every tactical situation had been war-gamed and prepared for. The result was a level of coordination that the Council's ancient bureaucracy simply couldn't match. Maria's tactical display chimed with an incoming transmission. The face of Admiral Vasquez appeared, her expression serious but satisfied. "Captain, excellent work on Galactic Prime. What's your assessment of their military capabilities? Maria considered her words carefully. Admiral, with respect, I don't think they have any. Not in any meaningful sense. Their technology is advanced, but their tactical thinking is at least 5 centuries out of date. They're fighting the last war, not this one. Elaborate. Their entire military doctrine is built around overwhelming force and technological superiority, Maria explained. They show up with bigger ships, better weapons, and force their enemies to surrender through intimidation. They've never had to deal with an opponent who refused to be intimidated, who was willing to take casualties, who fought asymmetrically. She gestured to the command center around them. This facility was designed to be impregnable against conventional assault. Orbital defenses, energy shields, automated defense systems. It would have taken a fleet to break through. But they never considered that someone might already be inside. Admiral Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. Our intelligence estimates suggest similar vulnerabilities throughout Council space. How are the locals reacting to the occupation? That's the interesting part, Maria replied. Most of them seem relieved. The crystalline workers we've encountered have been cooperative, even helpful. Apparently, the Council's leadership has become increasingly authoritarian over the past few centuries. Many of the member species have grievances that have been ignored for generations. This was perhaps the most unexpected aspect of humanity's campaign. As human forces seized control of Council installations across the galaxy, they discovered that the supposedly unified Galactic Council was actually a collection of increasingly dissatisfied member states held together by inertia and the threat of force. Captain, Sergeant Kim's voice crackled through the comm. You need to see this. We've accessed the central archives and there's information here that changes everything. Maria made her way to the archive center, where her team had connected human quantum computers to the Council's data storage systems. Petabytes of information stretched back thousands of years, the complete record of galactic civilization. What did you find? Sergeant Kim pulled up a series of historical records, his face pale. The Council's expansion protocols. Captain, they've done this before. Not just 3 times like they claimed. Dozens of times. Entire species wiped out for refusing to submit. The records go back 8,000 years. The data painted a picture of systematic genocide disguised as peacekeeping. Species that showed too much independence, too much technological advancement, or too much potential for disrupting the established order were quietly eliminated. Their worlds were sterilized, their histories erased, their very existence forgotten. Look at this, Kim continued, highlighting another section of data. The Altarians developed faster than light travel independently, just like humans did. The Council gave them the same ultimatum they gave us. When the Altarians refused, the Council destroyed their entire system and claimed it was a natural stellar collapse. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. How many? 47 confirmed extinctions, probably more that were covered up so well that no records remained. The scope of the Council's crimes was staggering. For millennia, they had positioned themselves as the guardians of galactic peace while systematically murdering any species that threatened their dominance. Humanity hadn't just been defending itself, they had been fighting for the survival of free thought in the galaxy. Maria activated her command channel. Admiral, we need to talk. I'm transmitting data from the Council archives. You're not going to believe what we've found. Minutes later, Admiral Vasquez's face appeared on the main display, her expression grim after reviewing the transmitted files. Captain, this information needs to reach every human unit immediately. And it needs to reach the Council member species as well. Ma'am, the Council leadership has been lying to their own people for thousands of years. Most of the member species have no idea they've been complicit in genocide. When this information becomes public, it's going to shatter the foundations of galactic civilization. Maria understood the implications immediately. Humanity hadn't just won a military victory. They had uncovered evidence that would destroy the Council's moral authority permanently. No government could survive the revelation that it had been systematically committing genocide for millennia. What are your orders, Admiral? Transmit the data to every Council world simultaneously. Let their own people see what their government has been doing. And prepare for chaos, Way. When this gets out, the Council is going to collapse, and we need to be ready to maintain order. As Maria watched her team begin the massive data transmission, she realized that humanity's war with the Galactic Council was already over. They had won not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but by exposing the truth. The Council's member species would never again trust an organization that had hidden such monstrous crimes. "Sergeant," she called to Kim, "start preparing transition protocols. We're about to go from conquerors to peacekeepers, and we need to be ready for the responsibility." The irony wasn't lost on her. Humanity, the species the Council had condemned as primitive and savage, was about to become the force that held galactic civilization together. They had fought to defend their freedom, and in doing so they had liberated an entire galaxy from the tyranny of those who claimed to protect it. The revolution had begun with Earth's refusal to submit. It would end with the birth of something entirely new, a galactic community based on truth rather than fear, cooperation rather than dominance, and the radical idea that no species, no matter how ancient or powerful, had the right to decide the fate of another. But first, they had to survive the chaos that was about to engulf the galaxy, when 47 species learned that their trusted leaders were genocidal monsters. 6 months after the emergency Galactic Assembly convened, the vote was finally ready to be held. The question was simple. Would the assembled species accept humanity's proposal for a new galactic government based on equal representation and democratic principles? President Walsh stood at the podium of the newly constructed Assembly Hall on Omega 7, looking out at delegates representing 47 different species. The contrast with the old council chamber was striking. Instead of hierarchical seating arranged by species status, the delegates sat in randomly assigned sections that forced interaction between races that had rarely communicated before the council's collapse. "Before we proceed with the historic vote," Walsh announced, "I want to address the concerns that have been raised during 6 months of debate. Many of you have questioned whether humanity can be trusted with the role we've assumed. Some have suggested that we're simply replacing one form of domination with another." She paused, looking at the diverse assembly. "You're right to be suspicious. History shows that those who claim to liberate often become the new oppressors. But we've tried to build safeguards against that outcome into the very structure of what we're proposing." The main display activated, showing the final version of the Galactic Compact that would govern interstellar relations. The document had been refined through months of negotiation, incorporating concerns and suggestions from every participating species. First, humanity would have exactly the same vote as any other species in the new Galactic Assembly. "We don't get extra influence because we initiated this process or because we have significant military power. One species, one vote, including us." Second, the position of Assembly Secretary General would rotate between species every 5 years, with no species eligible to hold the position more than once in any 20-year period. Humanity has agreed to be ineligible for this position for the first 15 years of the new government. Elder Kethvar raised one of his arms in the traditional hegemony gesture for questioning. "What prevents humanity from simply ignoring these limitations? You control the military forces that maintain order. You could easily override any assembly decision you disagreed with." Walsh nodded. "That's the third and most important safeguard. The new government would establish a multi-species military command structure within 2 years. Human forces would be integrated with units from every willing species, with joint training and shared command responsibilities. No single species would have the ability to use military force unilaterally. The proposal was radical, even by the standards of their revolutionary government. Most galactic civilizations kept their military forces under strict national control. The idea of genuinely integrated interspecies units was unprecedented. Furthermore, Walsh continued, all military action would require approval from the Assembly, with a 2/3 majority needed for any use of force, and any species could withdraw from the military alliance with 6 months' notice if they disagreed with Assembly decisions. Ambassador Thus extended his tentacles in a gesture of uncertainty. "These safeguards sound promising in theory, but what about practical governance? The old council may have been corrupt, but at least it was efficient. Decision-making by consensus among 47 different species could paralyze the government." This was the criticism that human planners had struggled with most. Democratic government was inherently slower and more chaotic than authoritarian rule. In a galaxy where crises could develop rapidly across multiple star systems, the ability to make quick decisions was crucial. "We've addressed that concern through the subsidiary principle," Walsh explained. "The Assembly would only handle issues that genuinely affect multiple species or the galaxy as a whole. Individual species would maintain complete autonomy over their internal affairs. and regional groups could handle local issues without assembly involvement. She activated a new display showing the proposed government structure. Most day-to-day administration would be handled by professional civil servants recruited from all member species. The assembly would set policy and resolve disputes, but implementation would be handled by people chosen for competence rather than political affiliation. Prime Node Veltar pulsed with the crystalline equivalent of skepticism. You speak of recruiting from all member species, but practical considerations suggest that certain civilizations are better suited for particular roles. The crystalline collective's natural networking abilities make us ideal for communication and data management. The hegemony's experience with logistics makes them natural administrators, and humanity's recent experience with warfare makes us natural military leaders? Walsh asked pointedly. That's exactly the kind of thinking that led to the Council's problems. Every species brings unique strengths, but we also bring unique blind spots. The goal is to combine our strengths while compensating for each other's weaknesses. The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Assembly's intelligence service. Commander Torres appeared on the main screen, her expression grave. Madam President, we've detected military buildups in 3 systems that have rejected participation in the Assembly. The Dominion remnant appears to be preparing for an offensive against the former hegemony colonies. A wave of concerned murmurs swept through the Assembly. The Dominion remnant was composed of several council member species that had refused to accept the new order, instead forming their own authoritarian government based on the old council model. They had been building military strength for months, apparently preparing to restore their version of galactic order by force. This proves our point perfectly, Walsh said, turning back to the delegates. The old system isn't dead. There are still powerful factions that believe in rule by force, in hierarchy based on power, in the right of the strong to dominate the weak. If we can't work together, if we can't create a legitimate alternative to the council system, then those factions will eventually succeed in restoring the old order. Elder Kethavar's mandibles clicked with anxiety. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we stop talking about theory and start dealing with reality, Walsh replied. The Dominion remnant represents everything we're trying to move away from. They're planning to re-establish the council system, complete with the authority to eliminate inconvenient species. This isn't about politics anymore, it's about survival. Representative Kicks of the micro-collective stood, their hive mind consciousness manifesting as a shimmering field of lights. You're asking us to make a decision about war or peace before we've even established whether we can work together in peacetime. I'm asking you to recognize that peacetime is a luxury we may not have. Walsh countered. The Dominion won't wait for us to perfect our government structure. They're preparing to attack while we're still debating. We can either stand together now, imperfect and uncertain as we are, or we can be conquered separately by forces that never had any doubt about their willingness to use violence. The Assembly fell silent as delegates contemplated the reality of their situation. The idealistic discussions of democratic governance suddenly seemed less important than the immediate question of survival. The old council's authoritarian system was gathering strength to reclaim the galaxy, and the only force capable of stopping them was an untested alliance of species that had barely learned to trust each other. Walsh looked out at the Assembly with a mixture of hope and determination. The vote we're about to take isn't just about choosing a form of government. It's about choosing what kind of galaxy we want to live in. Do we want to return to the old system of domination and hidden genocides? Or do we want to try building something better? The choice is yours. But choose quickly, because ready or not, we're about to find out whether democracy can defend itself against tyranny. The electronic voting systems, activated throughout the chamber as delegates, prepared to cast the most important votes in galactic history. 2 years later, Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Unity, the flagship of the Galactic Defense Fleet. The ship itself was a symbol of how much had changed since humanity's war with the Council. Built by a consortium of 12 different species, crewed by beings from 37 different worlds, and commanded using principles developed through unprecedented interspecies military cooperation. Admiral, reported Captain Maboto, a crystalline being whose natural networking abilities made her ideal for coordinating multi-species operations. All fleet elements are in position. The Dominion remnant's attack on the Nimble Folk homeworld has been halted. Elena nodded with satisfaction. The Galactic Assembly's military doctrine had been tested repeatedly over the past year, as the Dominion remnant launched increasingly desperate attacks against member worlds. Each time, the integrated defense fleet had responded with a coordination and effectiveness that surprised even its creators. "Casualties?" she asked. "Minimal on our side," Captain Maboto replied. "The Dominion forces surrendered when they realized they were outmatched. Their crews are being processed according to Assembly humanitarian protocols." That was perhaps the most remarkable change from the old Council system. The Assembly fleet didn't destroy defeated enemies or occupy their worlds. Instead, they offered membership in the democratic government to any species willing to abandon authoritarian rule. It was a strategy that had gradually eroded the Dominion's support base as member species defected to the Assembly. "Admiral Vasquez," came a communication from Assembly Central Command. "You're needed for the emergency session. The final Dominion holdouts are requesting terms for surrender." Elena transferred command to Captain Maboto and made her way to the communication center. The main screen showed the assembly hall on Omega 7, where delegates from across the galaxy were gathered for what might be the last crisis session of the transition period. President Walsh, now serving as assembly coordinator, was addressing the gathered delegates. "The Dominion leadership has indicated their willingness to discuss terms for ending hostilities and potentially joining the assembly. The question before us is what terms we should offer." Elder Veltar, representing the Reformed Crystalline Collective, pulsed with concern. "These are the same beings who attempted to restore the genocidal council system. Can we trust them to embrace democratic principles?" Ambassador Theis extended his tentacles in a gesture of cautious optimism. "Our intelligence suggests that popular support for the Dominion leadership has collapsed. Most of their member species were coerced into joining, rather than choosing freely. If we can separate the leaders from their populations, we might be able to integrate the people while dealing appropriately with those responsible for war crimes." Elena activated her communication link from the Fleet Command Center. "From a military perspective, the Dominion is finished as an effective force. Their last attack was poorly coordinated and relied on outdated tactics. Most of their ships were Council-era designs that couldn't match our integrated fleet technology. What's your assessment of their remaining capability?" asked Representative Kix, the Micro-Collective's delegate. "Negligible," Elena replied. "They might be able to conduct nuisance raids for a few more months, but they can't threaten any well-defended world. The war is essentially over. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The Galactic Assembly, built on principles of cooperation and democracy, had proved far more militarily effective than the authoritarian Dominion. When different species worked together voluntarily, combining their unique strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses, they were stronger than any force based on domination and hierarchy." President Walsh called for order as the debate continued. "The question isn't whether we can defeat the remaining Dominion forces. We've already proven that. The question is how we want to handle victory. Do we demand unconditional surrender? Do we insist on trials for war crimes? Do we offer amnesty in exchange for peaceful integration?" Elder Kethavar, now representing the Reformed Hegemony Republic, gestured for attention. "I propose that we follow the same principles that have guided us from the beginning. We offer full membership to any species willing to embrace democratic governance. We provide protection and aid to populations that have been oppressed by Dominion leadership. And we establish truth and reconciliation processes rather than punishment trials." "Truth and reconciliation?" Veltar questioned. "These beings attempted to restore a system that murdered entire species. And failing to learn from that history would make us just as guilty," Kethvar replied. "The old council system failed because it was based on punishment and domination. If we want to build something better, we need to prove that it's actually better, not just more powerful." The debate was interrupted by an urgent transmission from the Dominion leadership. Former Council Prime Zethkar appeared on the main screen, his forearms held in a gesture of formal submission. "Honorable Assembly," he began, his voice lacking its former arrogance, "the Dominion Council requests permission to address your body regarding terms for ending hostilities." President Walsh looked to the Assembly for guidance. After a brief consultation, she responded, "Permission granted, but this is a public session. Your words will be transmitted throughout the galaxy." Zethkar's mandibles clicked with what might have been nervousness. The Dominion acknowledges that our attempt to restore council authority has failed. Our member populations have lost confidence in our leadership. Our military forces are demoralized, and our economic systems are collapsing. We formally request terms for ending the conflict. What terms would you find acceptable? Walsh asked. Amnesty for Dominion leadership in exchange for peaceful dissolution of our government, integration of our member species into the Assembly under standard protocols, and... Zethkar paused, his voice becoming quieter. Assistance in rebuilding worlds damaged during the conflict. The request sent shocked murmurs through the Assembly. It wasn't uncommon for defeated governments to ask for mercy, but requesting aid from the victors was unprecedented in galactic history. Elena spoke from the Fleet Command Center. From a military perspective, those terms are more than acceptable. Peaceful dissolution would end the conflict immediately and allow us to focus resources on reconstruction rather than continued fighting. But is it just? Asked This. Many beings died because of Dominion aggression. Shouldn't there be accountability for those crimes? Representative Keeks pulsed with the bioluminescent patterns that indicated deep consideration in their species. Perhaps accountability doesn't require punishment. Perhaps it requires acknowledgement and commitment to change. President Walsh looked thoughtfully at the assembled delegates. Zethkar, are you and the other Dominion leaders willing to publicly acknowledge the failures of the old council system and commit to supporting democratic governance? We are, Zethkar replied without hesitation. The events of the past 2 years have proven that the Assembly's approach is superior to everything we thought we knew about galactic governance. We were wrong. About everything. The admission was stunning in its simplicity and completeness. The beings who had once claimed absolute authority over galactic civilization were publicly acknowledging that their entire worldview had been mistaken. Elena watched from her command center as the most powerful military force in galactic history chose mercy over vengeance. The Assembly vote on Dominion terms was unanimous. Full amnesty, complete integration, and immediate humanitarian aid for worlds damaged by the conflict. 6 months later, Elena stood once again in the Assembly Hall, this time as a civilian observer. Her military service had ended with the war, and she was preparing to return to Earth to write her memoirs of the conflict that had changed galactic civilization. The Assembly was in session, but the business now was routine. Trade disputes, scientific cooperation agreements, cultural exchange programs. The existential questions that had dominated the early sessions had been settled. Democracy had proved it could defend itself. Cooperation had proved superior to domination. Trust had proved stronger than fear. President Walsh, now serving her final term as Assembly Coordinator, was addressing a group of newly integrated worlds, former Dominion members who were participating in their first Assembly session. "Welcome to the Galactic Assembly," she said with a smile. "You'll find that democratic governance is messier than authoritarian rule, slower than direct command, and more frustrating than having someone else make all the decisions. But it's also more responsive to genuine needs, more creative in solving problems, and more resilient in the face of challenges." Elena smiled as she watched the newest members of galactic democracy begin their participation in the Great Experiment. Humanity had fought a war to defend their freedom and had accidentally liberated an entire galaxy. They had replaced tyranny with democracy, fear with trust, and domination with cooperation. But perhaps most importantly, they had proved that the old patterns could be broken, that ancient systems of oppression could be replaced with something